You know, if you've ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, you know the rules can be a source of, well, let's just call it spirited debate. But what happens when those debates get serious? Today, we are diving deep into a real-world legal battle, pulling everything straight from the court documents to see what happens when a homeowner decides to take on their HOA and actually wins.
A lot of these disputes, they don't just stay in the neighborhood. They end up right here at the Arizona Office of Administrative Hearings. And this isn't some friendly chat over the fence. No, this is a formal legal proceeding where an administrative law judge makes a final, totally binding decision.
So, who are the main players? Well, on one side, you have the petitioners. That's a group of homeowners led by a guy named Krahn. And on the other side, the respondent, the Tonto Forest Estates HOA Board. This is a classic case of a resident's reading of the rules going up against the board's power to enforce them. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into the initial dispute. Then we'll look at the fights over money and the fights over the rules. After that, we'll get to the judge's final decision, and then we'll wrap it all up with what this case really means for anyone out there living in an HOA. You know, this wasn't just about one little disagreement. Mr. Krahn and some other homeowners actually filed 6 separate petitions with the state. So to handle everything efficiently, the judge just combined them all into one big comprehensive hearing. That alone tells you just how many problems there were. All right, let's get into the first major bucket of issues, and it's one we can all understand: money. The disagreements here were all about who should pay for what, and whether the HOA was even following its own financial rules. So the very first fight was about septic systems. The HOA was charging every single property owner for septic maintenance, and that included people who just owned empty lots with no house on them. The homeowners said, "Whoa, hold on, this is a direct violation of our governing documents." Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see the core of the whole conflict right here. The homeowner's argument was dead simple. Just read the text. Section 4.32 specifically says septic costs are only for lots with a dwelling unit. The HOA's defense was, well, a little fuzzier. They argued you have to look at the whole context of the documents and that, hey, they weren't acting in bad faith. And the ruling, it was decisive. The judge sided completely with the homeowner. And the reason is so important. The specific language in the contract mattered way more than the board's interpretation of what it was supposed to mean. The judge said the CC&R is crystal clear. No house, no septic fee. That was a huge win for the power of just reading the fine print. But the money fights didn't stop there. The homeowners also went after a $75 reimbursement to a board member for a septic part. They argued the rules clearly say replacements are the owner's job to pay for. They also fought a violation notice for tree trimming because it didn't cite a specific rule and was based on aesthetics, a word that literally doesn't even appear in the community's rules. And yep, you guessed it, the homeowner won on both of these too. The judge found the septic part was in fact a replacement, which made the HOA's payment improper. And the tree violation? It got thrown out because it didn't meet the legal requirements of telling the homeowner what rule they actually broke. I think we're starting to see a pattern emerge here, right? Okay, so let's shift gears now. Let's move from money to the second big theme, the rules themselves. This next batch of disputes wasn't about cash, it was about process. These were fights over how the HOA was being run. We're talking things like election integrity, open meetings, and getting access to official records. Okay, this one is fascinating. The homeowners claimed the HOA broke its own secret written ballots rule. And why? Because after an election, the board was storing the counted ballots still attached to the signed envelopes they came in. This meant anybody could just go look and see exactly how a specific person voted. So the homeowner's argument was all about the principle of secrecy. But the HOA's defense was super literal. They said, look, the bylaw tells us how to conduct the election, but it says absolutely nothing about how to store the ballots when it's over. This is that classic letter of the law versus spirit of the law kind of fight. So what happened? The judge went with the spirit of the law, siding with the homeowner. The decision basically said that the whole idea of anonymity should obviously extend to how ballots are stored. It's also worth noting the HOA's new president had already testified they were changing this policy anyway, which was probably a smart move. Okay, 2 last procedural fights rounded out the case. First, the homeowners said the board broke open meeting laws by deciding to file an insurance claim behind closed doors. And second, they argued the HOA illegally held back records they'd asked for, using the excuse that they were part of ongoing litigation. And here we go, our first split decision. The homeowner actually lost on the closed-door meeting claim. The judge said that, yeah, state law explicitly allows a board to discuss pending litigation in private. But they won on the records request. And this is a brilliant point. You can't just use pending litigation as a catch-all excuse to hide pre-existing records that were made way before any litigation even started. So, after all the arguments, all the hearings, what was the final outcome? Let's go ahead and tally up the official scorecard. Let's run it down. On the septic assessments for empty lots, the homeowner won. The improper septic reimbursement, won. The invalid tree violation, another win. The secret ballot storage, win. The closed-door meeting, okay, that was a loss. And finally, the records request, another win. So the final tally is pretty stunning. Of the 6 separate legal challenges brought before the judge, the homeowners won a decisive 5. I mean, this wasn't even a close call. It was a near total victory for the petitioners. And that victory came with a price tag for the HOA. The judge ordered the association to pay the homeowners back for their filing fees on all 5 of the successful petitions. Now, with those fees running between $500 and $1,000 each, that came to a grand total of $3,000 the HOA had to pay back. So what's the big takeaway here? This case is not just a story about one neighborhood in Arizona. It is a masterclass in the rules of community governance, and it's got clear lessons for literally any homeowner or board member out there. So here are the crucial points. First, know your governing documents inside and out. The judge kept going back to the precise wording of the CC&Rs and bylaws. Second, follow your procedures to the letter. Those flawed violation notices and improper payments, they were tossed out because the rules weren't followed exactly. Third, transparency is key. Trying to hide decisions or deny records, it backfired, big time. And finally, document everything. Clear records, or the lack of them, made or broke every single argument. You know, this entire case really just boiled down to one side knowing the rules better than the other. And it leaves us all with a pretty critical question to think about, not just as observers, but for our own lives. How well do you really know the rules that govern your community?